Folks, all of you know that Legacy Precious Metals is a great sponsor of the Doug Collins podcast, and I can't tell you right now a more important time to know Legacy Precious Metals. There right now, your investment portfolio, if you look at the stock market right now, you look at the inflation that's going on, you look at the uncertainty out there, I'm going to tell you, the investments that you're making need to have gold and silver to be a part of it. You need the precious metals. Navigators are people who have been there, they know what to look out for, and they know how to come back and navigate you through the streams of your financial situation, whether it's for your retirement or whether it's just in your long-term investment strategies. Legacy Precious Metals folks are people who listen. They listen to you, they listen to your needs, and they help you navigate this uncertain financial times. When you're seeing the fluctuations back and forth, people will actually need to find a place where they have a portfolio that is balanced. Having gold and silver in that portfolio is something that you can have as part of yours. Just go find them at legacypminvestments.com.
You want to listen to a podcast?
By who?
Georgia GOP Congressman Doug Collins.
How is it?
The greatest thing I have ever heard in my whole life.
I could not believe my ears.
In this house, wherever the rules are disregarded, chaos and mob rule. It has been said today, where is bravery? I'll tell you where bravery is found and courage is found. It's found in this minority who has lived through the last year of nothing but rules being broken, people being put down, questions not being answered, and this majority say, be damned with anything else. We're going to impeach and do whatever we want to do. Why? Because we won an election. I guarantee you, one day you'll be back in the minority and it ain't gonna be that fun.
Hey everybody, got a lot to talk about today. I wanted to get this in a special time. I watched, of course, the State of the Union last night. Joe Biden comes to the Hill again to give the State of the Union, and really a lot to unpack here. So I know you're getting the podcast now. Here's what I want you to do. You're going to want to share this information. I'm going to take the State of the Union and break it down and give you the real story behind what's going on in this address. Really talking about the things that he wanted you to hear, but the actual reality of what's going on. So look, go to the Doug Collins podcast. You've already got the podcast. Now I want you to go down there, hit the share button, share it with somebody, follow it, keep this up, share it with the folks who need to hear a conservative response to what we heard last night from Joe Biden. When we look at the bigger picture here, the speech, again, the bar was set so low. Mainstream media was just, they wasn't talking about it. They wasn't, saying anything about it. They wasn't setting it as a lofty speech. They wasn't saying this was the, speech he had to knock out of the park. When the reality was the world was watching this speech. The world was wanting to see, what is Joe Biden going to do when you have a world at war, when you got Russia invading Ukraine? You got a whole situation there that has been talked about for months and actually happened. This happened last week. We're in the 7th day of the invasion, and Ukrainian people are putting up a valiant fight. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. But then he went on after, if you break the speech down, and what's what we're doing here this morning, but I wanted you to have this so that you can share it, you can be a part of the discussion today on really what Joe Biden was wanting to do. So let's jump right in. First off, right off the bat, did what everybody expected him to do, and that was to talk about, of course, the biggest thing in the world going on right now, and that's the Russian invasion of the Ukraine, and the fact that Vladimir Putin is just, again, seemingly more and more isolated, more and more, intent on, frankly, wreaking havoc in the Ukraine. We're seeing some stuff coming out of the Ukraine that we've not seen from the Russian army before. I want you to understand this. Russian army comes in, they come in with overwhelming force. They tend to isolate. They tend to surround cities. They look more toward the siege mentality. And then this first little bit, they have not made the progress, I think, that they wanted to. Now we're starting to see a transition into this siege mentality that we're seeing in Kyiv, we're seeing in Kharkiv and other places in which they're indiscriminately now basically raining terror. At this point, the playbook from Russia seems to be thrown out of the book. Putin has allowed cluster bombing, what we have seen reports of cluster bombing in neighborhood areas, indiscriminate bombing, the non-precision. I remember in the first few hours of this, Russia was saying, oh, we're only using, guided munitions. We're only using things that, we're going after certain areas. Well, undoubtedly that didn't work. The other thing is with Biden starting out the State of the Union talking about the Ukraine, it highlights the fact that the Ukrainian people are the heroes right now. The Ukrainian people and Zelensky is their leader. He has become really a leader of freedom in the world. It's interesting to me as you see what was discussed last night, and I actually have the speech right here. We're going to go over it in a sort of not a line by line, but we're going to talk about this. In the different ways that Biden sort of addressed this situation. What I thought was interesting is it wasn't a bold speech in the sense that, there was big, bold initiatives. He made, 2 initiatives we'll talk about in a few minutes, which are going to do little to nothing to affect the Soviet Union. I think he's banking on the fact that the world is coming around the fact that Russia has violated all the norms of international law and everything else, and we're seeing the ruble fall, we're seeing the stock market fall, we're seeing the oligarchs, and that's going to be an interesting part. He did talk about that last night, that going after the oligarchs and the Department of Justice looking at, these are the ones who have basically, pillaged Russia for years of their resources, minerals, and everything else. Putin, allowing in this, and they're going after their finer things in life, if you would. So this is setting up a stark contrast for the people of Russia, and the world is coming into this. What I found was interesting last night is he begins the speech and actually begins to talk about the things that he has done, that behind the scenes. Remember when all of us were talking, and even his own intelligence community said, hey, look, Russia's going to invade. We've got intelligence on this. They're going to do it. And there was this discussion, and I think early on of the discussion of what was actually happening. Why were we not being more forceful? There was a big disagreement. And Biden administration, again, looked like they were locked in that paralyzing state that they seem to be in all the time of analyzing and never acting, which paid and lost 13 lives for us in Afghanistan and let a country just develop and devolve into chaos because they wouldn't do anything and wouldn't listen to the advisors around them. Anthony Blinken, again, where did he come from? Again, becoming one of the listening, the people that Biden listens to in this regard. And so I think what he needed to do is try and explain, sort of why we did what we did. Well, it's sort of disturbing when he started laying out. He said he was working behind the scenes with ours, trying to make sure Europe was unified in their response. There's only one problem with that. When you look at the reality of what happened coming up into the Russian invasion, there was really a sort of what I've talked about before is sort of a shrug by Europe. I mean, if Biden was actually taking, the initiative with Germany, with the other NATO allies, Italy, France, these others, Great Britain, it was not being seen. And again, he's trying to say now, again, you can't point to it, but he said, this is what I was doing. The truth of the matter is the reason the world is doing what the world is doing right now is Vladimir Zelensky. Zelensky has been a leader. It's often said, I think it was actually, Glenn Beck talked about this before, that you want to see the countries that are going to come out of the chaos of tribalism and others, and if they are able to form a country, a democracy, you're going to have people that, like he said, I've heard him give a speech before in which he said, the people for the postage stamps. Well, I don't think there's any doubt now that Zelensky is going to put himself under the postage stamp, so to speak, of Ukrainian leaders. He's steadfast. He's firm. He's been out there. He is warning the world. He's trying to join the EU. He's doing everything he can to keep his country alive. And it is that focus that I believe right now is really solidifying the world. Think about this. You have Finland. You have Sweden. You have others who are now rethinking some of their closeness with the Soviet Union. You have Switzerland, who has never, even in the midst of World War II, with Hitler running rampant across Europe, Switzerland never broke its neutrality until now. And that's an important part that I want you to know is that the Russian oligarchs have billions in Switzerland and has now been frozen. That's why I said earlier, and I want to emphasize it again, if you're listening to this podcast, share this podcast. I'm going to break this speech down, talking about what's actually going on in the world. Share the podcast, hit share, hit like, make sure you're downloading. You'll get this information every time we download here on the Doug Collins podcast. I need you to do that. So what we found is he continues into this, and then he gets into sort of what we'll say is the meat and potatoes of maybe what he's wanting to say. I had said this before the speech. I said, I want to see what he's holding back in terms of response to Russia. I know we've done a lot of financial stuff against Russia. But the next question was coming into the fact that, what would be the next? Remember, we are still getting oil from Russia. We're still this is a reverse, kind of problem here, in which the Biden administration, when they first came in, they decided to take out the Keystone Pipeline, which it was almost finished. It wasn't finished yet, but when it was finished, would be able to supply us the oil that we need to maintain our energy independence instead of being energy dependent. This is a big story that I want you to understand, and really one of the things that I believe triggered, and we'll go back at time and look back on this Ukraine battle in a different way, but I want to understand, I believe Putin actually saw the willingness of the Biden administration to give away an energy independent situation, an energy independent America, by cutting off the exploration, cutting off drilling, cutting off the Keystone Pipeline, making it very difficult for us to maintain our own energy independence in natural gas and in oil. So these all set the stage because energy is the main product, so to speak, of Russia. That's where Putin gets his money. That's where the country, stays fit. This is still, going on. So some of us were looking at it and saying, okay, what is Biden going to do? Is he going to follow the lead of Canada and others who said we're not going to do away, we're not going to take Russian oil? We didn't get that. In fact, I think Biden is trying to walk this sort of liberal line of I'll push a little, but I don't want to hurt a little. It's a politician line. And as the old saying goes, and Biden last night liked to quote his dad. We're going to get into that in a little bit. Well, I'm going to quote, some of my grandparents and my dad and saying, if you ride the fence too long, pretty soon you're going to fall and it's going to hurt. And I think that's what we're looking at right now as we deal with this response. So what did he say? What was the response? Oh, well, we got two things out of last night. Number one, we're doing a no-fly, Americans a no-fly over American airspace. Russians can't use our airspace. We've seen this already in European countries. Again, leading from behind here, other countries had already done this. Is this going to affect Russia? No, not really. It sounds good. If you really wanted to get into this, but Biden made it very clear, and this is probably one of the agreement points, as this has started, we don't need to be sending our troops into the Ukraine. Some were talking about a no-fly zone over the Ukraine. There's been some discussion in Europe. I know Zelensky wants that, but that would put our troops in direct control. And if you don't believe this is a serious situation with the locality of the Ukraine in response to NATO, in which we have an Article 5 responsibility to, if one is attacked, we're all attacked in that regard. It's been reported many times over the last few days that the Army, the American NATO forces are also conflicting with Russian forces so that there's no misunderstanding about where forces are and what planes and others are going on. So this shows you how close we are to a war that is right now isolated in the country of Ukraine that could spill out into more of a world war perspective, but definitely a whole of Europe perspective as we go forward. So the first thing it is close off airspace, leading from behind. Again, he's just talking about this being isolating of Europe and isolating Russia, which is already happening. Again, we're following the lead of many others. Then he comes up with seems like the most, go-to switch of this administration when it comes to pricing, and that is to tap our strategic oil reserve. The strategic oil reserve is there for emergencies. It is not there to simply bring 2 cents off a gallon of gas. In fact, if we really wanted to start weaning off of Russian gas, then the American people would understand gas is going to be high for 6 to 8 months. But if we invest in our own energy resources, we open back up the Keystone Pipeline, we start this process. It's not going to take, overnight. We're not going to see this, but in long-term perspective, we would be much better developing our own energy resources instead of, as we hear Jen Psaki and others begging OPEC and the president saying we're asking our OPEC folks. Again, we're funding the radical world there because of our dependence on OPEC. I would rather have the dependence here, even if it took a little bit in the short run. He has said that he's going to lead the world. Here's his big choice: lead the world in releasing 60 million barrels from oil reserves across the world's platforms, and we're going to lead with 30 million. Now, if you're astute listener in here on this podcast, and like I said, take this podcast, share it with others. People need to hear this. We've already done this once when they were looking at the poll numbers, and poll numbers were saying that people don't like paying this much for gas, and so they released from the strategic oil reserve Again, not enough, day or two at most. And the realization is what they released from our strategic oil reserves was not the kind that our country and our refineries wanted to take. Most of it ended up on the world market. And frankly, did you see any real movement in your gas prices? I know I didn't, and most people didn't, and that's why they're still continuing this. But again, this is, and I love what he said last night. This was a direct quote from the speech. He said, these steps will help blunt gas prices here at home. No, it won't. No, it won't. It's just not going to. It's not going to happen. It's not going to blunt these prices. This is just something that, again, I'm amazed over and over for an administration that keeps talking about working people and talking about, our country and all, that they have no concept truly of what our economy is like. In fact, when you look at what we're going to talk about next, because after the Ukraine, he switches to the current conditions. He goes in a little bit of COVID. He goes into the problems. And then he tries to talk about the really only two areas of, I would guess you say accomplishments, if you would, of the Biden administration, so far this a little over a year into it is, and that is the American Rescue Plan, which was the COVID relief. This is a stimulus plan. It's sort of interesting, also in the same speech where he talks about giving out money to everybody. He also talks about opening up a fraud investigation through Department of Justice to go after the billions that we know have been defrauded from the government. So, and later in the speech, you also hear, what would he like to do? Spend more money. Again, without the controls, without anything else. And it's interesting that in claiming this as a win for the American people, he fails to realize that a lot of that money, and economists across the board, including liberal economists, have said this helped fuel the inflation fire that we're seeing right now. When you put money into the marketplace, you're seeing supply limited, you're seeing demand higher because people have more liquid income. They're able to go out and buy. The supply is not there. You have the supply chain issues. There are other things out there. Then actually, what this is that they're claiming is an accomplishment is actually not an accomplishment. In fact, it's actually hurting us more where we're at right now. Interesting quote he used last night, and I love how liberals will use this. We just need to give people a little and he used this. He said, my dad used to say it gave people a little breathing room. Now, a breathing room is keeping our costs down, raising our wages, which is something he did talk about later, but also providing business more opportunity to hire people and to be a part so that our economy grows, not artificially inflated by your taxpayer dollars, which is what we're seeing, and the reason a lot of this inflation is going on and the supply and demand issues that we're seeing. Again, I don't think the Biden administration truly, especially at the public level, understands what the causes and backfires of inflation. I just don't. But again, this is coming out of your and my pocket. When he talks about giving people a little breathing room, he's talking about the money he took from the government taxes and gave to somebody else. In other words, it's going to come from you. And this is what has driven inflation. Then he said something funny. It's funny if you look at it from a perspective. That's why you listen to podcasts. That's why I want you to share this podcast. I want people to hear that me break down from a conservative perspective what we're doing here. And then he says something that, like I said, this sort of, I chuckled. He said, but that trickle down theory, he talked about 40 years in the fastest growth, more jobs in the market, 6.5 million new jobs. Folks, I'm not even going to address this. You're smart enough to figure this out. The jobs came back when the country was opening up. As the country opened up, more and more folks like Florida, Georgia, Texas, we were already ahead of the curve, last year seeing this job increase. But as this increased more and more, what we saw was people coming back to work, coming out of COVID. We saw the economy strengthening. For Joe Biden to say that they created 6.5 million new jobs is just, it's stretching it at best. Because, a lot of these jobs were people opening back up, restaurants opening back up, hospitality industry opening back up, the airline industry opening back up. Across the board, we were seeing the economy coming back because of the shutdowns, lockdowns, fear, everything else that was surrounding COVID. So to claim responsibility for that is about like I always sort of say like a college football saying we won today. Well, you watched it happen. The team on the field actually produced the results, and your team won. For Joe Biden to actually say we've created these jobs, again, a lack of understanding on how the actual economy works, and an economy growing at a 5.7% rate. It is the strongest in nearly 40 years, but again, it's not a true, all of a sudden, here's how we come together showing our businesses how to grow and how we grow our economy. We grew it because it was so low, and then we were able to open back up, and it did come back, mainly fueled a lot on money given by the government. Here's another issue that, like I said, that made me chuckle. I talk about those issues there for a minute, but he said that trickle down, for 40 years we were told that if we gave tax breaks to those at the very top, the benefits would trickle down to everybody else. He said, but that trickle down led to weaker economic growth, lower wages, bigger deficits. Again, not true. In the bigger picture, we go back to the Tax Cut and Jobs Act that President Trump signed, that we passed through Congress. When I was there, if it had not been for that stimulus into our economy for jobs and job creation coming in before the pandemic, I believe the pandemic would have had a much more devastating effect. What's interesting is this, and I'm going to tie this together. This is something you're going to get here on this podcast. It's interesting to me that he takes trickle-down theory, he poo-poos it in his way of saying this doesn't work, and then the next part of his speech deals with infrastructure. It deals with building. It deals with, the infrastructure package and an investment package into businesses. Now, let me just let you understand something here. If you're waiting for your road or a new bridge, it's going to take several months down the road. Infrastructure is so appealing to politicians and members and administrations, governors, and all as well, is because it provides long-term job growth. These are not overnight jobs. And it's really interesting to me, there's not going to be, the bigger companies who can actually, contract these out, get these jobs out, are going to benefit. And then they benefit other smaller companies through contracts that they let for paving, for grading, for grassing, for building bridges, for doing the things that are out there. I can't. It's ironic to me that the President of the United States, basically talked bad about the trickle-down economics, but yet at the same point, one of his things he's pointing to actually is an example of providing except a wrong example where you look at, but infrastructure is providing money through government spending, which is what government, one of the areas, basically from the Constitution and everything else, the government should be in is that area of transportation, our ports, our bridges, things like that, and then giving it out so that jobs can be created. Again, I just find it ironic. I know what he is talking about. He's talking about just taxes and expecting everything else. But isn't it not the same basic philosophy that when you give states and you give big companies who do the road projects, do the bridge projects, do the harbor projects, do these airport projects, it does trickle down to other local economy. So again, stimulating business, stimulating growth, allowing business to operate are the things that our economy is made on. The concern here is too much government spending, like we had just giving it directly to people. We have an inflation effect here. So I just wanted to sort of lay that out. I think it's an interesting, side note here to understand, that you're not going to go to a mom and pop to build, 10 miles of road. It's got to start off with a bigger company who can actually then contract out, who then gives other jobs. And then he gets into what I'll call is sort of the wish list. It's the liberal wish list. And I knew he couldn't, but before we move to the economic wish list and the things that are going on, and what I believe is a basic misunderstanding here of the Biden administration of the economy. Before we leave the Ukraine, before we leave foreign policy, there's one thing that he never mentioned. Last night he did not mention the 13 lives lost in Afghanistan in that debacle that happened last year when the Taliban took over, and then we wouldn't walk 60 feet to be able to help people who had helped us. I think, again, we talked about oil and the dependency, our independence being lost on energy, and then I think Putin looking out there and seeing that we're not willing, what happened in Afghanistan. It is interesting and sad for me to note that the Commander-in-Chief, the President of the United States, last night did not mention, those 13 who lost their lives. In fact, he just sort of didn't touch Afghanistan really at all. And that's something that I think is interesting. Before we move on even further into the speech and economy, I did want to bring that out. Again, he spent a lot of time on lowering costs. He said, lower your costs, not your wages. I mean, economists all over are saying, he's, again, not getting this understanding right. Wages going up, costs are going up. Again, you're going to the corporations, you're going to business saying, look, we don't want you, we want you to lower costs, but at the same time, some of the cost inputs that you have, whether it be wages or supplies or others, are going up. We just want you to take the hit. Again, I don't think he understands small businesses do not have a printing machine in the back to print the extra money that they need to stay up. And then one of the surprise notes of this speech, I think it was interesting because it took it straight from Donald Trump. This is a Donald Trump quote. If you ever had one that's talking about the building up supply chains, building up manufacturing, and he says this. He said, "I call it building a better America." Putting America first. He talked about making American products, that all these things in infrastructure we're going to be, we're not going to rely on foreign supply chains. We're going to do it here. But that line I thought was really interesting when he said, I'll call it building better America. Interesting choice of words, if you would. He then moves on. He talks about healthcare. An interesting part here, again, he talks about the wanting to the American Rescue Plan and the Affordable Care Act to save $2,400 a year on healthcare premiums, again, in coverage gaps. There are ways to do this. Premiums are a problem. Premiums are not the only issue. If you can afford a small premium, but you cannot afford the copay, or you cannot afford the long-term, issues there surrounding what you have in insurance, then it's not any good to you. It's one thing to pay $50 a month for health insurance, but then when you go to the doctor for the first time, they're looking for a $500 copay. These are things that could be worked out differently, could be worked out through, working with states. We had presented a plan in Congress a few years ago to work on this. Again, they're just simply doubling down, going back to the Obamacare and expanding out Obamacare. Not a lot said there. I did think that we talked about insulin. He did talk about that a little bit later. But he again begins to pitch this idea of another spending plan. This is where I take it back to just what we talked about just a few minutes ago, when we actually sat back and he said, I feel your pain, I understand inflation, and his response look at what we spent. Well, now he's wanting to spend more money, and then he claims, that this will, number one, anybody earning less than $400,000 a year would not experience tax credit. That's already been debunked. Again, here it is again. You can say it as long as you want to say it, or you can say that the line that the administration keeps saying is that this would not cost a dime. Folks, if they don't have the money now, they have to get it from somewhere. It may not, for instance, come out of your pocket, but it's coming out of somebody's pocket. That's how they pay for government. Don't ever lose sight of this. This is government 101. Government has nothing you do not give to them. Sort of a symbolic of our whole nation saying, we the people. We the people give the government the power that they have. We also give them our money, and that's what the Democrats really like. But this idea of $400,000 paying additional knacks and pennies, no. Again, attacking corporations again, talking about their profits and their lack of pay. A couple of things, though, that he also went through in his laundry list, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these. I just want you to know about him. Again, he pays off to the so to speak, his gratitude to the unions by the PRO Act, which is, forcing basically unions, especially in areas of non-union states, and that is something to look at. As we go, he talks about, extending child tax credit, $15 an hour minimum wage. Frankly, if you go out there and look right now, very few places right now, are not paying, close to that kind of a pay. This goes back to the wage going up, but the inflation taking it over as we go. He did bring out something, and I want everybody to listen, because I have a lot of folks who listen to this podcast, and I hope you share this, download it, share it, make sure you get the podcast out to folks. He talked about, and this is an interesting quote, and I'll just read the quote. He said, Medicare is going to set higher standards for nursing homes and make sure your loved ones get the care that they deserve. And the reason he backed it up earlier in the speech. He said, Wall Street firms have taken over more nursing homes. Look, nursing homes are close to my heart as a pastor. I used to have to go into nursing homes all the time. Many times it was just sad. I mean, because you have, folks who've gotten old, a lot of their friends have died, family members may not be close by. Nursing homes are a place in which I believe, frankly, some of the best ministry that you could ever do is in a nursing home. But I am concerned. I think nursing homes, the vast, vast majority of them do what they need to take care of their patients. Where they don't, they need to be held accountable. I'm not sure this, except, again, it's interesting to me that he takes it that the Wall Street firms are buying them, the care is going down simply because the Wall Street firms are buying them. and then he's going to up the regulations. Again, that's going to translate into more cost. That's going to translate into more bureaucracy as we go forward. He also put in a note, a test, a treat. In other words, you get tested for COVID, you test positive. They're going to give the pharmacists the ability to give antiviral pills right there. Interesting concept. I'm sure that the medical associations at some point are going to weigh in on that one. We'll see. And for an administration that's made fun of antivirals, made fun of all kinds of other treatments, it's interesting that they're willing now to come up with a program in which you go to a pharmacist, you get tested for COVID, you test positive, the pharmacist is going to give you antivirals. I'm again, an interesting line in the speech. Just wanted to put it out for you. But I have also said in this speech, and I almost want to call this the last two things that I want to deal with today in this speech, and I want to really point out, and then there's one good. And for those of you out there who saying, Doug, you're just talking bad about the president, you don't want him to succeed. No, there's one issue, burn pits. We're going to talk about that later. But there's two issues that I have said now that I believe this is the all State of the Unions. If you don't realize this, it's a big deal. When I was in Congress, President Obama was in his second term, and then I had President Trump. State of the Unions were big deals. And because I remember growing up watching them, and you watch the Sergeant at Arms, he comes in and says, Madam Speaker, the President of the United States, the place goes, stands up while, at least for that one point. And then it sort of breaks down as years have gone by into more of a partisan back and forth. And we saw some of that last night. But State of the Unions can also carry some gravitas to them as well. And political folks look to the State of the Union to give a sitting president or to give a bump, to move them up, work their poll numbers. They poll test these speeches over and over and over again. So basically they're trying to give you what they believe you want to hear. What's interesting to me is poll numbers must have told them two things. Number one, which we already knew, people were tired of masks. They're tired of the mandates. They're tired of this problem with COVID. They're tired of being made to be in fear. And there's no place that's been more fear-mongering among COVID and COVID responses is the floor of the United States House. Nancy Pelosi has locked it down and refused to listen to science, listen to anything else, and continues with the mask mandate. Oh, wait. Up until yesterday, the masks were off. You look around, and what is interesting here, I think they wanted people to see not what was going on in Congress for the last, couple of years, where Nancy Pelosi was enforcing this ridiculous scheme of masking and distancing and everything else, which had gone away almost everywhere else. And remember, almost all of members of Congress are vaccinated. And if they put so much into the vaccinations, why aren't we doing some of the other? Many have natural immunity because they have gotten COVID. Again, a lot of different issues there, but it is interesting. Poll numbers were telling them they've seen it in Virginia, they saw it in New Jersey, they've seen it across the country, and with the president yesterday having a Quinnipiac poll say his approval at 37%, his disapproval well into the 50% range, it's interesting that here comes the president, into the chamber without a mask. He's schmoozing like everything is normal. I think it was a designed play to make people say, look, we're the ones who are doing away with this. We hear you. We're making this better. Second thing, in this poll-tested State of the Union, is they are hearing it over and over and over again that the defund the police issue isn't working. And it's interesting to say, he said this, in the speech, he said that when you're looking at people want to be safe, people want to be a part of their communities. He said this, talking about community policing, talking about crime prevention. He said, so let's not abandon our streets or choose between safety and equal justice. Firm river, someone who does criminal justice reform and works on criminal justice reform, that's what you look for. You look for safety and equal justice, where the crime meets the punishment. And his whole Democratic Party has been overrun by folks like Cori Bush and Rashida Tlaib and others who were not happy last night when he said, we should all agree the answer is not to defund the police. The answer is to fund the police with resources and training they need to protect our communities. Some of us have been saying that for a while. Interestingly enough, the poll numbers have gotten bad enough to where it actually made it in the State of the Union. Folks, do not share this podcast. I want people to understand how you break down a State of the Union. Share this podcast, download it, share it to your friends, put it on your social media, get the word out about this podcast. I want people to have it so that you can have it as a tool in your toolbox. The one thing that is true here is that this poll tested. If it was not polling well, he wouldn't have put it in there. And there was a couple of ideas here that polled to more moderates, independents, conservatives, however you want to look at it, to say this is something we agree on. Again, conservatives have been saying this for a while. Then he has his obligatory attack on the gun industry and saying that they can't be sued. That's just false, folks. The gun industry, for a malfunctioning, just like anybody else, if their equipment is malfunctioning, they can be sued. What he's talking about, let's make this very clear, what he's talking about is being able to sue a gun company simply because somebody got killed. That's what he's saying. It would be like opening up to sue Ford, GM, Chrysler car dealers to be sued only, not because their vehicle did not perform fine, but because I got in the car and did something with that car as an instrumentality of violence, that then you could sue the car company. Don't be fooled here, folks. They can be sued. If the gun didn't work properly, they can be sued. But excuse me, the one thing that they can't, you're not going to be sued for is like suing a knife company if somebody stabs somebody. You can't, again, just the utter stupidity of that statement and that it's allowed to stand is amazing. But then we come to the most, what I say, tone-deaf part of this entire night, not aside from the fact they didn't mention Afghanistan. And that was immigration. He actually went there. This is a president who assigned the vice president to secure the southern border, to find out what the problem was in immigration. So far, she's not found the southern border, but I guess her, Nancy Pelosi, and others, the wall was built around the Capitol last night, by the way, because they were scared of protesters. The wall is still, we've already paid for it, too, by the way. Remember this. We've already paid for the wall materials that are at the southern border. They're not putting it up, and we have the highest rates of border crossings we have seen ever. We're being infiltrated right now with more people coming across our border than Russia put into the Ukraine. Put that in perspective for a second. Again, he went there, though, and he talks about new technology and cutting-edge sensors and detecting drug smuggling. Again, not mentioning numbers, not talking about the crisis, not saying it's a crisis, not saying that they're putting in, kids and families and putting them in the dead of night, flying them to other parts of the country. Nothing about that. But he just said, hey, we're working on it a little bit here, just, I think, to appease the bases that needed to hear this. And then he said something. Here's your saving point. Here's your sharing point. Now, I want you to understand this. Hear me clearly. Here's what he said that I think should be one of the lead topics on anybody's list today about what was in that speech. Listen to what he said. He said he's talking about immigration. He said we can do all this while keeping lit the torch of liberty that has led generations of immigrants to this land, my forefathers and many of yours. Look at what he said. He mentioned immigration. Why? To continue to say the open door on our southern border is there. Come on. No discussion of stay in your own country. Come here legally. Don't do it that way. No, in fact, he talks about this, once and for all, tries to invoke the Chamber of Commerce. But then he says, as he says, we're keeping all this while keeping the torch of liberty that has led generations of immigrants to this land, my forefathers and many of your own. He's basically saying, look, we're not going to do anything else on the border. In fact, we're leaving that torch of liberty. That was the code word to see that they are going to do nothing about our southern border. And the poor people in our Customs and Border Agency, our ICE agents, everybody had to look at that and say, really? You basically said nothing about helping stem the tide of illegal immigration at our border. And then you light the candle and say, oh, wait, we're still the torch of liberty. You just come on just like everybody else did before you. Folks, I can't make this up. I mean, this was the part. I don't know why this is not being, trumpeted on the front page of almost any headline. This is one, again, he sort of hit it toward the end of the speech, put it in there, something we've seen before. I did tell you, though, that there was one issue that I would say, okay, we agree upon, and I think that is something that needs to be investigated, and that is burn pits. He talked about it in terms of burn pits, cancer. For those of us who served in Iraq and Afghanistan and others, burn pits are large pits where basically they burned everything. They had no way of getting away with the trash, so literally they burned medical waste, they burned boxes, paper, they burned everything, and that's the way they incinerated it. In the black smoke, I remember being in Balad where I was stationed. Some mornings you would get up and literally it looked like thick fog that was all over the entire base. And when I first got there, I said, what is this fog? And they said, no, that's not fog. That's the burn pit. I literally did not run outside a lot while I was on the base or exercise outside. I would go to the gym mainly because the burn pits, it would burn your eyes. And it burned 24/7. It was worse in the beginning, and even when I was there in 2008, 2009. I'm glad to see, I will state this, I'm glad to see the president actually talked about this and is encouraging the VA and others to deal with the burn pits. Folks, there's a lot in that speech. Most of it we'd heard, most of it was not a surprise. What disturbed me and I guess bothered me, why I was so adamant getting this out today, I wanted to tape it for you. I wanted you to get this podcast so that you can take it, share it, go to the Doug Collins podcast, share, like, download it, make sure you get it, make sure you share it with your friends. Find 5 friends who need to understand this speech or you think we need to share it with so that you can get it to them. Because what I saw last night was a Biden who had clearly still no real recollection of, or real understanding of how the economy works. Number 2, no acknowledgement of the debacle in Afghanistan and the 13 lives that are lost there. We saw a wish list of liberal programs that contradict very much of the speech where he says he wants to lower cost and help people on inflation, but yet putting more and more money into the system, which will not help. Actually, looking at something like infrastructure, which a lot of us can agree, if it actually had went to infrastructure, it'd been even better. That infrastructure bill only had about 10 to 15% actually going to infrastructure projects. And then we actually saw the turn, what I'll call to the right, the no masks, sort of looking normal last night. And then you talked about the funding the police and our community safety, which is going to be a bigger issue. This is an election year, folks. These were all election year themes. And he was trying to make it, again, he sees the disaster that is coming, but the Democrats are trying to say, look, no, we're not defund the police, although everything else they say is. And last night also many of their own members started talking about that they disagreed with the president on that. The economy is still an issue, inflation issue, but they showed nothing to actually understand how economies work so that we can get people, not only the people working, but making sure that our supply chains get better. Only a little bit of a discussion on building more here, building in America. Those are the kind of things that have to be looked at. And then really a lack of what I call leadership in the Ukraine. It was more of here is what we did behind the scenes. It was, and many of what they even said last night to do, or leading from behind. So the State of the Union is over. We'll look where it goes from here. State of the Union, I think, was, again, I'm just going to call this the poll-tested State of the Union. Not a lot of surprises here. A couple of surprises in their bent toward trying to pick up independence or even a conservative agreement on these things. We'll see how this all operates. But again, special day today, special edition of the Doug Collins Show that I wanted just to get to you so that you can share it. You can take this while everybody's talking about it. You're going to have this podcast, share it with other people so that you can break down and see how this speech really applies to the real world and how conservative principles actually are better. What we saw last night was not conservative principles. What we now see is you can take this and then show how Republicans or conservatives will be different in this election cycle, and I wanted you to have it. You go out, share it, be there. We'll be back on the next Doug Collins Show podcast. Hey everybody, it's Doug Collins. I can't wait to tell you about a new partner here on the Doug Collins podcast, Healthy Cell. HealthyCell.com. You can go to their website. They are reimagining the way that we take vitamins. I mean, look, you don't still listen, for the most part, record players or for the vintage side. You look at for old time, you don't listen for the crispest, clearest. There's things out there that you get right now that have updated in the future. And we're still taking vitamins like we did back in the 1930s. This new technology, this new product from Healthy Cell is a microgel that takes your vitamins, puts them in a gel form. You can take it straight out of the pack. You can mix it in water or your favorite food, but it gets into your system so much quicker. 165% better absorption through this microgel technology. And believe me, the more you get in the nutrients into your body, the better you're going to be. They have a full product line. I take these medicine, these Metagel packets. They are amazing. We have been on them now for a little over a month, and I can tell the biggest difference. I've taken vitamins most of my adult life, and the way these work is just something that I don't think that you can find anywhere else. Again, it's healthycell.com. You can go /Collins or use Collins in the promo code to get a 20% discount. You don't want to miss this. Please go check out their website, healthycell.com. Microgel for these vitamins that are the best thing out there right now to keep you healthy and listening to the Doug Collins podcast. Folks, I don't know about you, but I cannot stand a towel that simply moves water around me after my shower. I like a towel that grabs you, takes the water, gets it off of you, and does what a towel's supposed to do, dry you off. I've had so many towels I bought over time. Some are expensive, some were cheap, but again, when they just sort of move the water around, I could just stay in the shower and stayed wet. I need a towel that gets me dry. That's where our friends at MyPillow come in. They have towels, and you're not going to believe the bargain that they have right now. Mike and the folks at MyPillow have offered a 6-piece towel set. That's 2 bath towels, 2 hand towels, and 2 washcloths, regularly $109.99 for $39.99. All you got to do is have code word Collins. You can go to mypillow.com, or you can call them at 1-800-986-3994. If you want towels that actually do what they're supposed to do, dry you off. You know, that's what we do here on the Doug Collins podcast. We talk about real answers and real solutions for a complicated world. Well, sometimes you may not think that getting water off of you is a complicated process, but undoubtedly it is for some towel companies. It's not for the folks at MyPillow who actually have a towel, the MyTowel, which is a great investment for you. And right now you can get it on sale regularly $109.99 for only $39.99. And that is with code word Collins. Also, anything else that you want to go on there, you can still got the slippers, you still got the MyPillows, you still got everything that is on that wonderful website. You want to go check it out. Use code name Collins and get your discounts. Folks at MyPillow are waiting on you right now.